Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles event. We welcome back to our series Brad Stone and Nick Bilton. We invite you to visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel for over 300 conversations. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle is Live Talks LA. They'll discuss Brad's new book, Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. Brad is Senior Executive Editor of Global Technology at Bloomberg News and has covered Silicon Valley for more than 20 years. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Everything Store, Jeff Bezos and the Age of Amazon, and The Upstarts, Uber, Airbnb, and the Battle for the New Silicon Valley. Nick Bilton is a special correspondent for Vanity Fair, a New York Times bestselling author, a screenwriter, and a former columnist at the New York Times. He's also host of the popular podcast Inside the Hive with Nick Bilton. His reporting spans technology, culture, society, the future, and politics. I am Ted Haptagaber, founder and producer of this series. They will talk, and towards the end, I will pose some questions sent in from you in the audience. I'll let you take it from here, Nick.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This is very exciting in a virtual setting. Brad agreed to send me $1 million Dogecoin to do this. So I'm just waiting for them to appear on my phone. Brad, what's going on there?
That's coming. That's on its way.
So what's funny is you and I went on a book tour a couple of books ago together when you wrote your first Amazon book and I wrote my Twitter book. And I remember at the time, both of us drinking and lamenting the process, not only of writing books, but of writing about these two companies. And the idea of writing another Twitter book to me makes me want to, eat glass with my cereal. What compelled you to revisit this company and essentially this person, Jeff Bezos?
Yeah, great story. Great start. Yeah, I remember that, and I probably did feel that way at the time. But look, I mean, the Everything Store came out in 2013, and if we just flash back 8 years, Amazon's $100 billion market cap, maybe. The company employs maybe 70,000 employees. Jeff Bezos has a relatively miserly fortune of maybe 40, let's say $30 billion back then. And it's the Kindle company, right? It's an online retailer. People still think of it as a bookseller. And I was really proud of the Everything Store and being the kind of chronicler of this company that has changed the world in good ways and bad. But what happened as I, continued to talk about the book and hear people's reactions to the book is that the story was changing so dramatically in so many ways. I mean, the Kindle company became the Alexa company. Amazon spawns a transportation network that's driving our roads and highways. The marketplace goes global, and counterfeits and fraud come onto the site. Bezos undergoes a startling personal transformation, which we can talk about, and he becomes the wealthiest person in the world. Amazon now employs over 1 million people. The market cap is over $1 trillion. And so the story changed. And, I just felt like if I was going to continue to say, and feel like I had this definitive history, it needed a whole other installment. Star Wars needed The Empire Strikes Back. And so that's what kind of led me down the path. And as I was working on it, the story continued to evolve.
So it is really fascinating. I remember, funnily enough, I don't know if you remember this, but my first ever print story at the New York Times was a story that you and I co-bylined about Amazon buying TouchCo, which was the touchscreen company at NYU. And they hadn't even made a touchscreen Kindle yet. That was on the front page of the business section. And what I find so amazing about the book is, it's the Amazon book, but it really is the Jeff Bezos story. And the thing I found so fascinating reading it is you chronicle all these growth periods of AWS and buying Whole Foods and Amazon Studios and so on and so forth. And what's so incredible is Jeff's ability to be hyper focused on that thing. You talk about him compartmentalizing things, but am I right in assuming from reading this that all of his suggestions are always right? Because it's what it feels like. It feels like, there's these moments where I mean, one of my favorite moments in the book is when they're presenting the sales numbers to him for retail, and he stops and he asks a question. He has his accountant kind of run some numbers, and you can tell the story better than I can. And everyone's like, what the hell is he doing? And he's realizing that the retail numbers are not going up. It's actually the advertising that is. And for someone's brain to be able to do that on the fly when the people who, you know, work for him and put together these reports for hundreds of hours can't figure it out. What is it about Bezos that makes him able to do this stuff?
Well, let me just say, you know, he's intuitive, he's insightful, he's super smart, but he's definitely not always right. And hopefully some of that comes through in the book. I flash backwards pretty briefly in the first chapter to talk about the infamous Fire Phone and how he had this grand vision of a 3D screen, and the employees knew that it was going to work. They actually bought dog tags that said disagree and commit, which is kind of Amazon lexicon for, we don't think this is a good idea, but we have to fall in line. At another point in the book, Jeff reads an article in the Washington Post about how a normal hamburger could be made from the meat of like hundreds of cows. And he commissions, because of this article, he commissions a single cow burger. And, you know, it doesn't make really any impact on Amazon's business. But, you know, he tries a lot of things. He's often wrong. And I find that, like, as he's gotten wealthier, he's sort of left the realm of mere mortals. And so his tastes are really wildly different than normal people's, which can lead to some weird, awkward bets like the single cow burger. But to go back to your question, you know, I think that the meeting that you're talking about, where he's able to look at an appendix full of data and discern that the economics of the retail business are declining and are being propped up by advertising, and then to say the retail business is 20 years old, it needs to stand on its own, and that meeting leads to layoffs and renegotiations with brands and all sorts of difficult things. That is his strength, his ability to dive into even though as he hovers over the whole business, to come into various corners of Amazon, to audit them, to go dive deep into the details, and then to make these really unpleasant proclamations and to send all the ants scurrying in panic to kind of please him. Yeah, this is like the company from a financial perspective has been so successful. And that is one of the reasons. His ability, his familiarity with the business, and his ability to kind of manipulate the levers on this very complicated empire that he's developed.
One of the things that you talk about in the book is this, you know, there are these moments where Jeff is looking at the bottom line and not necessarily at the people. There's the story about the I forget exactly where it was, but I think it's somewhere in the Midwest, and people were fainting from in the warehouses because it was so hot. And the guy in charge had said, we should put air conditioning units on the roof. And Bezos was like, absolutely no way. And that was, you know, simply a financial thing. Is he a bad guy? Is he a good guy?
Right.
Like, I couldn't kind of figure that out. Like, I mean, you know, on the one hand, 1 million plus people have a job because of him. On the other hand, he won't put air conditioning units on the roof of this, you know, fulfillment center because it costs $52 million or whatever the number was. And I couldn't discern. This is actually a two-part question, because not only I couldn't discern, but like, you've covered him for so long. Do you think he's a good guy or a bad guy? Like,
yeah. Well, let me answer it this way, Nick, and I think this might be broadly true for a lot of the tech titans that we have covered in our careers. There is something that's absent there, which I would argue maybe has allowed him to be so relentless and successful, which is a little bit of empathy, right? I mean, most people are going to look at, you know, the work in the fulfillment centers and, you know, and make probably some uneconomical decisions. Yes, to put air conditioning in the warehouses in the Midwest when no other warehouses are doing it and when it might be expensive, or, you know, maybe it's, you know, to have all the driver schedules and to make sure that there are ample bathroom breaks. And, you know, and I think this is also in terms of Amazon's corporate culture, the white collar offices, you know, how tough it can be, the pace of work, the compensation systems, they're all tuned by Bezos for kind of maximum efficiency. And no, I don't sense that he is stopping to kind of consider people's feelings I have this revelation in the book, and it seems small, but I think it's significant, that he at one point changed the comp systems for the warehouse workers so that there were no more raises after 3 years unless you were promoted. Sounds maybe, okay. He didn't want people to hang around and to get disgruntled and become entrenched and maybe join a union. It's kind of unbelievable, right? It's sort of master of the universe thinking, let's move them through. They'll go get other jobs. We don't want to be. He looked coldly with calculation at the automakers and said, look at what an entrenched hourly workforce has led to there. Unionization, strikes, and the fact and disruption from the likes of Tesla and the overseas automakers. So he didn't want that. And economically, that's probably a pretty masterful, calculation. But in terms of empathy, it's lacking. So I'm not going to make a broad good guy or bad guy judgment, but that's his skill.
Well, but one thing that to continue on this, economically, yes, he's making a very sound, smart judgment for the company. But from an empathetical standpoint, it seems that there's something lacking there. But the question is, look, you worked for someone who refused to put air conditioning units in the, or said, intentionally aged workers out, right, after 3 years or whatever, you'd be like, this doesn't feel great. I don't agree with this. But yet it seems like from the reading of your book, even the people who had been pushed out, who had been fired, who had been berated by him in meetings. And berating is fine. We all get berated. But even they didn't necessarily have that many negative things to say about him. Is it that he has this kind of larger than life personality, or he makes people think, okay, sure, we're going to be jerks to these people, but we're getting toilet paper to these people for the best price imaginable? What is it that makes people come into work every day and not say, you know what, I'm not going to work for this guy?
Right. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, he's, an inspirational and can be, charismatic and a visionary figure. He's the stereotypical founder, technology founder. He's created a big company and disrupted numerous industries. I remember talking to one employee, this woman, Cynthia Williams, who's in the book. And in around 2008, she presents a paper to Bezos, and it's about fulfillment by Amazon, one of their warehouse programs. And he looks at it and he identifies a miscalculation in the appendix, and he tears up the paper. He says, if I can't trust this number, I can't trust anything in this document. And he throws it down the table and walks out of the room. And the remarkable thing is she stays at Amazon for another 10 years. And yeah, you've identified a kind of contradiction there. People view it as sometimes the most productive years in their career, right? It's a high performance culture. It's sort of survival of the fittest, but oftentimes they take that experience and they move on and they do something else. So, like any sort of difficult competition, I think people feel like they go there obviously it attracts a certain kind of people, right? A very competitive, business-minded person or a technology person who wants to go and have an impact and do battle in this Game of Thrones-like environment. Clearly not for everyone. I can say, for myself, I probably wouldn't last a hot second. And knowing you, Nick, you probably wouldn't either. But
I wouldn't even make it through the front door.
For some people, that is their thing.
When you look at Jeff and covering him over the years, and who he is now, it's interesting. I've been to work events because of, through Vanity Fair and, Hollywood things and so on. And he's always there. And I always wonder, I always look at him from across the room, wonder what makes the richest guy in the world want to come to this? And do you kind of get the sense, as someone who has covered him for so long, that there's something partially in the social aspect of it, him, flying around the world, doing talks, this, that, and the other, hosting the campfires that you talk about in the book, all these things. Do you, and then plus on top of that, the fact that he everything is day one. do you get the sense there's some kind of, and I know you're not going to answer this properly, but I hope you do, but that there's some sort of psychological thing at play where there's never enough, it's like, if I were I will never be even remote. I won't be the millionth richest person in the world, never mind the richest person in the world. But if I were, I don't think I would be going to Hollywood parties and hosting talks every 2 days and flying around the country to do an interview. And, what do you think it is that is going on there?
Well, okay, so I'm going to try to answer the question. Well, first of all, the wealth accumulation. Remember, he doesn't get paid really much of an annual salary at Amazon at all, and he doesn't get more stock. His wealth is purely a virtue of the ownership percentage. It started about 20% that he had at Amazon at the beginning, and the growth of that fortune. So in terms of like wealth accumulation, it's not like he's been trying to accrue more. It's just that Amazon stock price has grown. In terms of the growth of Amazon, he has been relentless. Entering new markets, looking to dominate different countries. I think that he's a businessman. He's a capitalist, and he understood very early on that for a technology company or even a retailer to rest on its laurels, to stop trying new things, is kind of the road to obsolescence. So the day one mantra is a way to keep people sort of fearful. And I think the end goal is really to kind of create an enduring company. Like, he's a builder, he calls himself an inventor, and he knows that he needs to build these mechanics inside the company to keep it from getting stale. And like, the business landscape is littered with companies who are in decline. Okay, but let me now answer the personal aspect of the question. And this is where, the ground underneath us becomes unsteady, because I can't speak for the guy. I don't know. Early on, he was very absorbed in the mechanics of building Amazon, really obsessed with this one thing. And I have this quote from Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan in the book, who's friends with Jeff. His eyes gradually opened to a larger world. He became a kind of citizen of the world. And I think it was the Washington Post, and I think it was moving Amazon into Hollywood and enjoying, creating the new TV shows and movies and getting into kind of what works and what doesn't. He goes to these parties. He has them in his Beverly Hills home. The stars come out. He's the brightest bulb in a room full of them. The attention is gravitating towards him. That can be intoxicating, particularly for a person who probably didn't have much social success early in his life. And so, look, this is human stuff, right? He enjoys it. Whatever is happening in his personal life, he gets divorced. He's now with someone, Lauren Sanchez, who thrives in this kind of social environment. They're at Wimbledon. They're on the David Geffen yacht. They're posing in front of the Taj Mahal. And I think ultimately he enjoys it. He likes the attention. He has a key to the upper echelons of elite society on both coasts. And, he feels very comfortable there, and he likes it. And so, I don't think he's, it's at the aggregation of more power. I think he's enjoying himself.
When you, I want to get to the Lauren Sanchez stuff, but I have a few more questions just about the business and Amazon and so on and so forth. In the book, you don't get to Andy Jassy, really. It's I'm not going to give away the ending here, but it's something that I was excited to learn a little more about, and I understand probably that was because of the timing of publication and the way everything went down. But give us a little insight into what made Jeff decide to pick Andy. Right. I know that you talk about, as the book comes along, the people who are rising up and he's becoming more trustworthy of, and the importance of AWS and so on. But I always think about, I remember both of us covering Apple when Jobs was deciding who was going to take over, and it was, there was moments it was going to be Johnny Ive, and there was moments it was going to be some outsider, and you and I sat in a meeting with Steve Jobs at the New York Times and asked you, I think you asked him that question, like, who takes over next, and he had said it's not going to be a business person because they're going to screw up the company. And what what insights do you have into what made Jeff decide Andy and why?
Yeah. Well, I go back. I mean, right. We don't sort of know what the specific decision-making process was. But 2 points in terms of timing. One, the other natural candidate was a guy named Jeff Wilke, who ran the retail business. And he told Bezos that he was going to retire from Amazon in early 2020. Then he delayed that because of the pandemic, but ultimately in late 2020, he left the company or started the process of leaving the company. And then in 2021, Jeff selected the natural only remaining candidate, Andy Jassy, who had run the cloud business. But I go back to the antitrust subcommittee hearing over the summer of 2020. I don't know if you remember it, Nick, but Jeff had to appear via Zoom. So did Sundar from Google and Zuckerberg from Facebook and Tim Cook. And the whole thing was a political theater and really awkward. And Bezos didn't get a word in edgewise. And I just thought afterwards that this is not how he prefers to spend his time, right? He wants to be, working on new stuff and working on rockets at Blue Origin and figuring out, what the next Amazon product is going to be. So Andy Jassy is cleaved from Jeff's rib. The guy, he followed him around when he was the shadow. He was the shadow. He's very Bezos-like. He's been remarkably successful at AWS, and he's also a humbler figurehead. So Bezos is the wealthiest person in the world. He can stand there in front of Congress or EU regulators, and nothing that comes out of his mouth is going to sound authentic or humble or really be satisfying to regulators. Jassy is not a flashy guy. He presents a humbler target. And I think Jeff maybe recognized, that not only does he have here a great operator and who's familiar with both sides of the business, because Jassy started on the retail side, then grew the cloud side, but he's someone who can have some credibility with lawmakers. And that is the next phase for Amazon. It's being in the courtroom, metaphorically and literally, and having to answer questions about its economic power and the impact it has on Main Street and other companies. So I think that probably went into the decision. But again, with Wilke leaving, it was sort of an obvious one.
All right, let's talk about Lauren Sanchez. My favorite part of the book. I mean, I literally was like, what happened next? What happened?
And by the way,
Yeah.
I was a year into the book about when that all happened. So you can just imagine my combination of surprise and delight that here I was going to have a tabloid chapter to my business book.
Did you get any, let's talk about a little bit about the reporting process here. Did you get any insight into it before anyone else? Did you heard rumors that this was happening, or were you just totally blindsided?
This will be sadly disappointing. And I was disappointed in myself because as someone who was writing a book about Bezos, I would like to think that I'm in the know. But no, when the divorce tweet hit, and then the next day when the Inquirer splashed across 11 pages and online news of an affair with, the wife of one of the most powerful people in Hollywood, the thud of my jaw hitting the floor was probably as loud as anyone else's.
So I don't understand. Were they cheating, or was it there was some sort of, and you don't necessarily say this outright in the book, and I'm curious if maybe you just don't know, but were they cheating on their significant others? Because it seemed like it was going on for quite some time, for a couple of years before anyone figured it out. Or was there some sort of understanding, or? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you've identified a source of ambiguity, and I would just say that we, ultimately, you never know what is happening in other people's marriages, right? And that's really the most private thing. And I have seen reporting that Patrick Whitesell and Lauren Sanchez had explored divorce earlier. I've never heard anything like that about Bezos and McKenzie. The one interesting thing, and I don't know if this is indicative of an answer to your question, but throughout 2018, Bezos and Sanchez were conducting that relationship really out in the open. And, they were having dinner in LA, and he took her to the Post to see the printing presses. Yeah. he took her to Seattle to see the headquarters. She was at the Blue Origin events and the Amazon robot event. So either he didn't care or he didn't understand that this would be of some interest to the world, particularly with him being such a, the wealthiest person in the world. And it's interesting, and we'll get into the brother, Michael Sanchez, and there's plenty of reasons to condemn him, but he was the only person in their orbit who looked at the whole situation and said, this is crazy. Like, you're going to dinner and you have PDAs, public displays of affection, and, tabloid photographers might be around. So I don't know if that meant he felt free to conduct that relationship, or he just really didn't care who saw him.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he's out there, in 2018, I'm surprised that more paparazzi didn't snap pictures of them, and as you're talking about at dinner in LA. And all right, so let's talk about Michael Sanchez, who I want you to write your next book about.
Oh God.
So he's a Republican. He's gay. He's Sanchez's brother. He runs a failed PR business, and he plays this duplicitous role that is worthy of a sitcom, maybe. I don't know. Is he a sociopath? Like, what's going on with this guy? When you talk about the fact that he went from setting up this $200,000 deal with the National Enquirer, and then he sets up a deal with the sister for $25,000 a month, and he's playing both sides, and seems like and feels at the same time like he's a hero in this story. Like, how does that work? Like, what? Tell the listeners here the story in brief, and we can get into a little bit more of the psychology.
And we'll see if we can psychoanalyze without getting into trouble. We mentioned that he's invited to dinner with Bezos and Lauren Sanchez in, I think, the spring of 2018. He observes the public displays of affection. He realizes that the world, this might be of some interest to the world. And, for whatever reason, by the fall of 2018, and I'm going to be kind and ascribe what he has said publicly were his motives. He feels like, the world needs to be told about this, otherwise it will sort of end in public humiliation. And he starts to, kind of led on through a litany of clues about this relationship to some of his contacts at the National Enquirer. Now, we can come back to this, but there was later a sort of fog of ambiguity around whether was it the Saudis, was it somebody in the world of Trump, and it was really not. I concluded that. Prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, I believe, concluded that. But Sanchez sort of leads them along for a couple of months and ultimately gives them a thumb drive full of images and text messages.
And how did he get those?
Well, in the sibling relationship was peculiar, and she had been forwarding him stuff. I think partly to kind of maybe boast about the relationship, partly because they were very close and he would sort of help her come up with responses. That's my sort of best guess on it. It is a little peculiar. Now, to be clear, the images we're talking about now are not explicit. Okay, we can get into the idea of an explicit photograph. But so he shares those with the Enquirer to prove to them that what he is saying about this relationship is true. He doesn't believe that, he believes their agreement precludes them from publishing any of the text messages or the photographs, and that goes out the window later on, and they do start referring to them, and they print a couple of the text messages. They never publish the photographs, by the way, but they print a couple of the text messages. So, I use the adjective scheming in the book to describe Michael, and I feel like that, it is nice. Nick, as you know, I can be too nice, but he basically constructs an elaborate, rationalization for what he's doing. And most people look at it and go, dude, you betrayed your sister. The one point in his favor is like they were on their way to being exposed anyway, but in accepting of the payout from the Enquirer was really the sort of fatal flaw, because it looked very transactional, right? It looked like he was trying to make some money from them.
It didn't look, it was transactional.
It was transactional.
And then to take the money from his sister to go and defend her to the National Enquirer, I mean, that takes some guts.
Beyond.
And then, so I spoke to some Amazon folks for some other reporting I was doing, and the thing that one of them said to me was, after reading your book, was they had no idea that the the picture of Bezos's genitals wasn't even real. Like, and that to me was one of the most shocking revelations in the story from your reporting, was that it was just a random picture this guy got from. Well,
let me tell that story.
Yeah, tell
Which,
that story.
by the way, is a phrase and a concept I never thought that
would end up in an Amazon book,
or we would be discussing in a venue. Yeah. Okay, so let me get over the shock and embarrassment.
And I want you to explain this, but I want you to tell the story about once you explain how this will happen. It's not real, right? But Bezos never disputes that, and I'm curious, right, even to his coworkers, to the senior level executives, and I'm curious why. I mean, that'd be the first thing I'd be like, hey, it's not real, guys. It's totally.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that he knew. I believe that in unraveling this saga, I got to a level of truth that perhaps only maybe the FBI had understood, because they questioned everyone. And, maybe Ted can jump in and tell me, I know this is a family forum, so I don't know how explicit we can get, but we're talking about a dick pic. Okay, right? That is what we're talking about. And here were the facts going in. The National Enquirer thought they had it, and Bezos certainly took them at their word, and in that Medium post accused the Enquirer of extorting him by saying they would publish it unless Bezos and his affiliates came out with a statement that said the Enquirer story wasn't politically motivated. And there were reasons why the Enquirer was sensitive about that. It's a whole other story having to do with Trump and catch and kill. But the fact was, the Enquirer thought they had the dick pic, and Bezos and his representatives believed him. So I had to untangle this, because Michael Sanchez kept claiming that he never gave it to them. And essentially, they kept pushing him in the fall of 2018 to show them this one other photograph. And I don't know if he had it and deleted it, or if he just wasn't willing to show it. But what he ultimately told investigators was that when the time came to meet, he went to a gay escort website, rent.men, not one that I had been personally familiar with, and downloaded a photograph and showed that to the Enquirer. And then there's some question, did the Enquirer editors, two of them were FaceTiming from New York, did they capture the image over FaceTime with a screenshot? And then they believed that was authentic and claimed in the negotiations that they had it. That's at least what I believe federal prosecutors and investigators concluded.
So your theory is, because this is the part where when I read Bezos puts out a Medium post about this and says that he's been extorted. I didn't know this headline existed until I saw it in the book. Whoever wrote that New York Post headline, Bezos exposes Pecker, deserves a Pulitzer. There should be a Pulitzer Prize for New York Post headlines. Like, no I hate the paper, but that headline was brilliant. But so Bezos puts out this Medium post, and he essentially says he's being extorted for this dick pic, but he never says it's not real. So is your theory, just kind of, putting on your conjecture hat here, is your theory that there was one and that she never sent it to him, but he maybe made it up, or there wasn't one, or Jeff was drunk and doesn't know?
I think it's beyond it doesn't matter, because the photographs that the Enquirer did have, that Sanchez did give them in the thumb drive, they did include some sort of semi-explicit photographs. And Bezos,
like what kind of things? Like them,
low-cut dress / revealing photographs. We don't need to get into detail in this conversation, but if you look at the Medium post, it does describe some photographs that would be embarrassing. And and Bezos, maybe kind of to his credit says, or he's following the Gavin DeBecker private detective handbook. Basically, when you're extorted, call out the extortioner. And so he prints those emails, and he basically risks his own personal embarrassment. But he does something else, which is he wraps himself up in the mantle of the Washington Post and says his ownership of the Post is a complexifier for him. He says that the political motives of the Enquirer and its parent company AMI are still to be better understood. And that was really the masterstroke / evil genius maneuver, because he was able to kind of, cast this whole thing in the spirit of like defending the paper and maintaining a free press and defending the memory of Jamal Khashoggi against the Saudis, and really none of that, I conclude, had anything to do with the saga. But it was effective, and sympathies in the whole matter kind of swung to Bezos' side.
Well, it's interesting. That was another question I had. Is I feel like from your book that buying the Washington Post it felt like another thing for Jeff. He wants to be closer to Washington, and he clearly knows this regulatory stuff is happening and so on and so forth. But it felt like towards the end of the book, it had become, maybe part of it was a big smart ploy, but it also felt like the Washington Post was something that he was almost the most proud of. Was that right to say, or is that?
Well, I think so. I think he recognized that owning the Post had become enormously, beneficial to his public image, and he was responsible, and we have to give him credit for turning around the paper, doubling the size of the newsroom, leaning it in the direction of the changes that were hitting the media business. And partly they got lucky because all boats, were in the media were rising on the ocean of Trump. But, the Post, he really did turn things around. And look, when you're the CEO of an enormous company that's largely a retail business, putting small mom and pop competitors out of business, you're likely to be viewed as somewhat villainous. And so,
am I interpreting it in the wrong way, that it's more of a PR ploy than it is a something? Because he's showing up to these dinners. He's like, he's involved in helping get the reporter out of Iran. Like there's all these things that he's doing that I don't even know Sulzberger at the New York Times.
I think he found a sense of mission and pride in it. I do. And I think it was partly the situation in Iran with the Post reporter who was held hostage. He flew there to bring him back. The Jamal Khashoggi thing. He says in the book, I have a chapter on the turnaround at the Washington Post, and he basically says to Sally Quinn at one point, "Now I get it. Right now I understand why this institution is so powerful." So, I don't think it was a PR ploy. I think he understood the benefits of the positive PR, but I think it was for him a different world, his eyes opening up to a East Coast society, some access to the corridors of power, but also an example of where his system of invention, the papers and the meetings and bring me new things and investing in digital projects, it was sort of another playground for him. And, must have been gratifying because immediately in the first couple of years, it starts to turn things around, right? So it's a great illustration of success for him. Now, Blue Origin, the space company, the opposite's happening. It's kind of going in we can talk about that. But, he's got his wins and his losses, and, holding up the Post for him is understandable because it's a success.
So, but Blue Origin, for when he talked about leaving and some of the public statements he's made, that's the future for him. I've heard him say at an event before that, if he wastes all of his fortune trying to get us into space, then, he's done the right thing. And it doesn't seem like it's working out, is that because he's just not focused on it, or is it because it's a really hard problem and only a handful of people can help solve it? I mean, you talk about him sitting down for lunch with all of the employees and asking them, what's wrong with this place, but I didn't necessarily get a sense that, looking today at where the company is, that those things have changed.
Right. And we can't say that it's impossible or it's just hard, because unfortunately for Bezos and Blue Origin, there is the example of SpaceX and Elon Musk, which, have established the world's dominating rocket company right now and have had remarkable success. I believe that early on, Jeff kind of set some of the wrong priorities and the culture at Blue Origin. He had this idea that they would move slowly, that it would be a small team, that he would cap his investment. He talked about step by step, ferociously, and be the tortoise, not the hare. And that was fine until the hare came along. And Elon built his business in part by getting the government to pay him to send up rockets and bring military and government satellites into space and take astronauts to the space station. And Elon became this space figurehead, and he was getting paid to build his company. And Bezos is there, now selling billions of dollars worth of Amazon stock every year. And he gets a little jealous. He accelerates the timelines of Blue Origin. He increases the ambition. And as we know, when you change things like that, it can lead to dysfunction, right? And you had a company that was supposed to be small get really big, and you had a new set of leaders come in, and the old people leave. And he picked a CEO, Bob Smith, from Honeywell, an established aerospace company, and old aerospace kind of comes in to a new aerospace company where they kind of hate old aerospace, and it's kind of the recipe for a lot of trouble. And meanwhile, Jeff is managing it all from afar, kind of disillusioned with how much money he's spending, and coming in every couple of weeks to kind of blast everybody with new directives. And that's a recipe for trouble. And Elon picked Gwen Shotwell to be the COO of SpaceX. They've been remarkably consistent, and you get the sense that Elon spends a lot of time there. So, we'll see what happens now that Jeff is resigning as CEO of Amazon. But so far, there hasn't been much success to show for his investment at Blue Origin.
And now him and Elon just get into Twitter fights about their respective rocket sizes and so on and so forth,
so to speak.
And
legal battles. Every time SpaceX wins a contract, it feels like Blue Origin is protesting it.
I loved the Elon responded to Jeff on Twitter the other day saying, "What's the matter? Can't get it up," regarding the rocket. And then when someone reached out to Elon to ask for comment about it, Elon responded with a poop emoji. So these are the titans of business that we are now
I would say Elon's being juvenile in his response, but considering the territory we've traversed in this conversation, maybe we're all indulging a little bit.
So I think we have a few more minutes before we get to some audience questions, but I want to go back to not to Lauren Sanchez, but to Jeff and the relationships for a minute, because I have been to a number of events with Jeff, and in the early days, I remember seeing him and Mackenzie, and him talking about, telling me stories about his kids and his 16-year-old son who still sat on his lap, and and he felt, and I always felt this sense of like, oh, he's a really impressive human being who has this wealth, who is still a family man. It still holds it all together, loves his family, loves his kids, goes home and helps them. You have the great story in the book about his son giving the speech about Jeff teaching him about magnets, and then of course, it falls apart. And do you think that, Mackenzie clearly feels like she never changed, that she has this solid core of who she is, and so on. And in your first book, you talk a lot about, you go through the story of Jeff and his biological father and things like that. Do you think that that there's and I know these are questions that you don't necessarily like to veer into, but they're the human ones that I think a lot of people talk about and wonder about. And did he kind of have a midlife crisis through all this? Is there going to be a moment where, Lauren is like bored with her helicopter landing pad on the boat and decides to go and philander with someone else, and like Jeff's going to be like, what the hell did I do? Or is it just that this is who he is now?
Right. Well, congratulations on a completely unanswerable question.
Okay.
Let me say this.
This. Yeah.
He's human, right? And that was one of the surprising things, I think, to Amazon employees, and maybe even to a sort of relief, that the person you describe, extraordinarily wealthy, has it all, doting family, doting wife. He used to say, he does the dishes every day. It's so sexy. Those are words you never want to hear from a CEO, but I remember him saying dishes. That. Yeah, and that he's human, and like Bill Gates, recently, Bill and Melinda Gates announced their divorce. they're human. That the problems and diverging growth patterns that afflict a lot of couples impact them. I think with Mackenzie and Jeff, the sense was from the people in their orbit that he, as the world opened, we've been talking about his eyes opening to a larger world, that he enjoyed that. He loved going to the dinners with the elite, being in the parties with all the actors and actresses, being the center of attention. And she is extremely private, as we can see by her philanthropic record so far. Medium posts, but no interviews, hardly photographed. And so I don't know, that seems probably a simplistic interpretation, but it's the information we have that they were really on different paths. A lot of people at Amazon were, shocked by it. Some were disappointed by it, but some really thought, okay, this guy is a human being after all, and he's mortal, and, he can screw up like the rest of us. And, I found it somewhat amusing. And as I sort of alluded to before, kind of refreshing, and even a little bit of a journalistic opportunity, because here he is a real larger than life character who's changed our world in so many ways, and and also has always tried to be so private. You remember, Nick, how if the story ever is about Bezos, Amazon PR kind of lashes out. Why is this story about Bezos? This is a collective accomplishment. This is the company. Well, Bezos went and made the story about Bezos, and it was sort of, you couldn't avoid it anymore. So anyway, that's how I'd answer it. He's human like the rest of us.
I love the moment when he walks into the conference room during the week of the divorce and says, raise your hands if you've had a tougher week than me. Which was, but then back to the compartmentalization and got straight to work.
Right.
Which is,
and it's Valentine's Day, and he forgets that it's Valentine's Day, and he keeps everyone too long.
Yeah. All right. So last question before we take a few audience questions is, when you look, when you read books about the Rockefellers and the titans of the past and the businesses of the past, AT&T they have this sense of like a blue chip, that they are going to be here forever, and they have survived 100 years or more of business tribulations. Some of them didn't, Sears and places like that. When you look at Amazon, again, it's speculation, but it's informed speculation. I could do this with Apple or Twitter or something like that. I think in 20 years, I don't think Twitter will be a business, to be totally honest. I think that social media will have run its course, and it may have changed, but it won't be what it is today. When you look at Amazon and Jeff and these companies in 20 years, 30 years, what do they look like? What is Jeff, is the rocket company the thing? Is Amazon a $20 trillion company? Has it been broken up by the government? Like, what do you think, just your predictions as an informed reporter who's covered them for so long, like, what is the legacy of these companies and these people?
Right. Well, if we're talking about, in the world of tech, a kind of glacial future, a long-term future. And so that it is hard to predict, but I will say that, like, the mechanics of what he and his colleagues have set up at Amazon are really solid. I think, it's like a clockwork that is set up to keep going and going. When they just took out like a multi-billion-dollar bond, and that's all that they always do, that so they can build more fulfillment centers closer to customers, deliver faster, and that fundamental business I don't think really goes anywhere. It keeps offering good prices, more stuff, but they get it to you ever quicker. And Bezos could walk away tomorrow, and that clockwork will continue on. So the baseline assumption, if we're talking 10 or 20 years out, is that Amazon's still a massive company. And then you look at, okay, all the other things that they're trying, getting into healthcare or putting satellites into space to offer internet access. Could it be, double that size? And that depends on how well they execute on some of this other stuff. And then the third part of the question is, do they get broken up? And first of all, the pattern matching we can do is Microsoft in the 90s, where even while there was a clear monopoly and anti-competitive behavior, it wasn't broken up, right? So already, we can conclude that it not only will Amazon be harder? Because it's really not a conventional monopoly. It competes with Walmart and Google and Microsoft. It's going to be a harder target. It's sitting next to Google and Facebook and Apple. So there are lots of targets for government. I don't think Amazon gets broken up unless voluntarily down the road they decide they want to do that. And if that happens, we might be facing a sort of Rockefeller-like situation with Standard Oil, where we have a lot of little Amazons roaming around the landscape, and they're all independently successful. So I think, 20, 30 years, Amazon or its successors are still juggernauts. Bezos with Blue Origin, we don't know. Maybe, and let's be optimistic, that the real legacy could be climate change. He says he's spending billions of dollars to fight climate change. And I think it's great news that one of the, great intellects of our generation, of our world, is going to apply himself to the hardest problem of our times. And hopefully he can make an impact there.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. I think we're going to take some audience questions now.
Yes.
Ted, you want to take it
Sure.
away?
Thank you, Nick. Here's several questions. One says, do you really think we are going to have drone delivered packages from Amazon?
That's a great question. And so in 2013, Bezos goes on 60 Minutes and talks about this technology that is completely not ready for prime time and isn't even permissible by law. And a lot of folks at Amazon were kind of incredulous about it. I think it probably will be practical, but the fact is that today Amazon drives our roads. I don't know about your guys' neighborhoods, but we got Amazon vans crawling here in the Bay Area, and those vans are packed with packages. And when you pack a van with packages, the economics of delivery get better because you're not, going out of your way to deliver each one. My point is that drones, it becomes unnecessary. If you're already driving, big communities and you're investing in electric vehicles, why do you need to send package by package through the air where, people with guns will be happy to sit there and snipe them? So
But what about in the Midwest and places like that?
Maybe.
That's
maybe.
where that one driver has to go all the way down to the end of Evergreen Lane, and is that a feasibility? Or
I could see that ultimately being feasible, but then you're talking about a very small percentage of Amazon packages, and that is what the post office does. They are required by law, even when it's uneconomical, to go deliver to those outposts. And Amazon has a good relationship with the post office. So I think the technology might be closer than the economics and the practicality of drone delivery are.
Next question. How much did he personally get involved at the Washington Post? Not just from the staffing point of view, but on the technology side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very involved. So I think I said before, he set up this cadence of biweekly meetings. He asked Post executives to bring him new things. And one of his favorite employees at the Post is this guy, Shailesh Prakash, who's the CTO or the CIO, I think. And they developed ARC, the publishing platform that now lots of other newsrooms use. When Shailesh, I report this in the book, had an offer from the Wall Street Journal, Bezos kept him at the Post. He also gave Shailesh an advisory role at Blue Origin, so kind of using all the corners of his empire to keep this guy who he thought very highly of. And yeah, I think, Trump always accused Bezos of getting involved in the editorial operations. I never got the sense that he did that. And, as Nick knows, a billionaire owner tells any journalist what to do, and they're probably going to walk out the door, in indignation. So Bezos was too smart to do that. But I do think he looked at the tech stuff. He looks at the tech stuff very closely.
This questioner says Trump seemingly made decisions because, or to spite Jeff Bezos. Do you really think he did? And if he did, how did Jeff take it, or did Jeff perceive it to be that way? And do you really think AWS got screwed in the JEDI deal?
Yeah. So just a little bit of background. JEDI was this $10 billion cloud computing contract that the Pentagon said they were going to offer to one single technology company. And that was just the recipe for disaster, because it was such a plum contract that suddenly you had all sorts of shenanigans and wranglings and companies lobbying intensely for this prize. But at the time, Trump was extremely annoyed with the Washington Post. He disliked Bezos. He was probably jealous of Bezos and his fortune. And the question of whether he intervened, I mean, that is one that is being scrutinized by the courts in an endless process that will probably be going on after we have all left this planet. But my guess in looking at it is that he did, or Trump at least created the kind of atmosphere that the Pentagon bean counters knew that they needed to go in a different direction. And look, the Jedi contract could now be thrown out because of that. And how did Jeff interpret it? I mean, I think at Amazon, they felt like that Trump was out to screw them, and they filed lawsuit after lawsuit.
Well, you talk about
yeah.
You talk about in the book about, I mean, you put all the tweets up that, and even the one that I hadn't even seen of Trump ragging on Bezos when with the dick pic and he clearly hated the guy.
Yeah. And look, it played into Amazon's hands because they're unwilling to accept the idea that they might have lost the Jedi contract to Microsoft on the merits. So, even if they didn't know whether Trump had put his fingers on the scale, it was incredibly convenient for Amazon to say this process was unfair. And look, Blue Origin protests when SpaceX wins, Amazon protests when Microsoft wins. This now appears to be part of the Bezos playbook when he loses a match to start complaining to the referees.
Next question. He started with books, went into TV production and streaming, and then the cloud, and individually, the Washington Post into the media, and now space. What other industries do you think he has his eye on?
Right. When will he stop? Healthcare is one, and all the big tech companies see that as, fruitful potential area to disrupt. Healthcare, obviously, as we've seen over the last year, has a lot of challenges. Bezos set up a group within Amazon that he calls the Grand Challenge, and I'll meet with them once or a couple times a month, and they'll just, again, it's like the Post, bring me new ideas. And it's everything from an online pharmacy to spectacles, glasses that have Alexa in them. I have no idea how that's related to healthcare, but that came out of the Grant Challenge. Or a new wristwatch, that will like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch monitor some bodily functions. They have telehealth healthcare services, or Amazon clinics where employees can walk in for healthcare. So they're trying a lot of things. That's a big area. And then the other one is, the other big moonshot is satellite internet access. Amazon has this project called Project Kuiper. Starlink from SpaceX is a lot further ahead, but Amazon sees that as the kind of meaningful industry that could produce an outcome that grows Amazon even more.
Next question. Do you think Jeff Bezos at the very beginning envisioned Amazon would be the everything store and started with books because of the convenience of how the book industry manages inventory?
Yeah. No doubt the decision to start with books was not because he was a lover of books or loved reading, which he does. It was very strategic. There were a couple of distributors. He could offer unlimited selection for books, even if they weren't in the warehouses. It was tactical. But the idea for Amazon, which was conceived on the 40th floor of a hedge fund called D.E. Shaw, when Jeff was a vice president there in charge of coming up with new ideas for D.E. Shaw, the idea was, back in 1994, that you could do an everything store on the internet. You could offer unlimited selection. And that was just a hypothetical. And in the early years, I think the people around him convinced him to just talk about books. Everything else would be interpreted as crazy. But I do think that overall, he had like big ambitions to build an empire, to build a company that was, I don't know if he certainly didn't imagine Alexas and cloud computing. That all came later, but certainly a kind of Walmart of the web was the idea very early on.
The answer to that question makes me feel so inferior as a human being. I'm like, I can't even get a book done. I'm like, I could do this. And meanwhile, he's like, we're going to sell everything on the internet.
I have two more questions for you. How much more and in what ways do you think he'll get into philanthropy?
Yeah, I think it'll be the major focus for the next couple of decades, in part because he knows he has to. The billionaires throughout history have always been judged Their legacies have been evaluated not by what they build, not by the fortunes they amass, but by what they give away. And he came to that realization late, and only because of a lot of criticism that he had been kind of miserly in his donations. And he started with, the Day One Academy, kind of rethinking early childhood education. And then he realized that wasn't going to be quite enough, and the Bezos Earth Fund, and giving away $10 billion to climate philanthropies. And, it still almost feels like a little bit of an afterthought in terms of where he spends his time and apportions his resources. One of the great challenges for wealthy tech people these days is that their fortunes tend to grow faster than they can give them away. And so to make any kind of a sizable dent and sort of change the public perception about his giving, he's really going to have to commit, to creating a foundation or an institution that can make some serious financial commitments. So I do think that'll take up a lot of his time.
A final question is about the movie Nomadland. Were you surprised the makers of that movie got access into an Amazon facility?
Well, first of all, I just saw it. Nick, did you see it?
I didn't see it. I've been waiting to, we have 2 little kids, so it's hard to watch
Right.
anything, but I've been waiting for like a period of time where I know I can put my head in it. But
Yeah.
I've read a lot about
It's
I've
great.
read a lot about that intro with that Amazon fulfillment center. So
yeah, it is not a kid movie, that's for sure. No, Amazon is, look, they gave me cooperation, and maybe they realize that they're a topic and object of scrutiny, and that if they play ball with projects like my book, Amazon Unbound, or a movie like Nomadland, that the outcome isn't guaranteed, but it's probably better if they're just, closing the door and turning away the authors and the filmmakers. So there's probably kind of tactical decisions inside Amazon that they need to, be a little bit more vulnerable in their dealings with the press. Otherwise, it's going to be really easy to target them. So no, I wasn't surprised. And I heard a lot of criticism of the movie about its depiction of Amazon fulfillment centers. And I thought it did a great job, that it sort of captured the kind of melancholy and the transience of working in an Amazon fulfillment center. There weren't, bosses ordering people around and crushing their spirits, or, people going to the bathroom in buckets, or whatever horror stories you hear. But, it wasn't a hagiographic portrayal. She was, Frances McDormand's character seemed pretty sad, going through the rituals of her workday. But in some cases, like, it was often that moment of like connection with her employees every year that they met, with her colleagues every year they met in the fulfillment center. And there was a camaraderie there too, which I think is really legitimate and authentic. So I thought it was great, and I was happy to see it win Best Picture.
Well, thank you very much, Brad, and thank you, Nick, for being part of this conversation. Again, Brad Stone's book is Amazon Unbound: Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. It is available wherever books are sold. Thanks, and go on gently.